Can you make sure Bill knows to? Like, right, I want to make sure that we have lots of time for the interactive stuff, and it is 1:30, so I'm going to get us started. All right, so we've got a website or QR code and login information here for an activity that we're going to do about halfway through the session. If you haven't done it yet, I will re-show later so that you can QR it and log in as well. And so this is the methods and evidence for understanding disease transmission at the Urban Development and One Health Interface in Kenya. This is a project that is a collaboration between the African Population and Health Research Center, the University of Iowa, but also other institutions like Maseno University and Princeton University. So let's get rid of that. Right. Move it somewhere. All right. So the background point of this session is that it's based around the sort of emerging urbanization issues that, like a lot of the world is going to be living in urban cities in the next couple of decades. This is going to offer some new challenges for global health and infectious disease epidemiology. We all know that children under 5 that live in unsanitary environments face the highest risk from transmission of pathogens from the environment and from zoonotic pathogens. Although, just as a sort of plug for the One Health paradigm, domestic animals, other types of animals also face a lot of these same infection risks. So when we think about prioritizing interventions for urban development to prevent these environmental and zoonotic transmission events, this involves requiring information about where and how these exposures and infections are occurring. How are humans and animals and environments interacting with each other? So, there we go. So what we're going to talk about today is a method that we have developed for a larger parent study called PATHOME. Pathogen transmission and health outcome model, pathogen transmission and health outcome models of enteric disease. I'm really sorry for this window. If anybody doesn't know how to get rid of
Click
that.
more, have a look at the corner, far corner,
Yeah.
and then go down to hide video panels. Hide floating meeting controls, that's it, yeah, well, control alt shift.
There we go. Oh, perfect, thank you. Okay, so you can find information about the broader parent study on MedRx, although we also have a BMJ open protocol paper coming out soon. We're not going to go into the details of the broader study today because we're going to focus on geo-tracking. But just for some context, the 2 approaches that we are using to understand human-animal environment interactions in PATHOME are structured observation and spatial geo-tracking method. These are conducted simultaneously over a 24-hour period in the midst of other health data and environmental data, socioeconomic data collection. So it's nested in the middle. So the learning objectives that we want to go through for you today are for you to understand the advantages and disadvantages of structured observation and geo-tracking methods for getting at these human-animal environment interaction dynamics. Start to understand a little bit about how to implement geo-tracking methods with the community. We're going to also provide some hands-on activities related to learning how to use the phone and web-based mechanisms for viewing and extracting geo-tracker data, and provide some recommendations for improving data quality of the information you obtain. And then last, we want to end with much more of an open brainstorming exploratory discussion around ways that you could potentially use geo-trackers in your own research and practice. Because from a pathogen perspective, these approaches are really disease agnostic. All right, so this is our outline. We're going to start with a lecture from Sheila Simiu at the APHRC, introducing you to the structured observation approaches that we're using in the session. This will be followed by a role play interactive activity. Then we're going to have a lecture from Phyllis Bustieni, also at the APHRC, on the community-based development of the geo-tracking protocol that we're now using in the parent PACOM study. Followed by a talk from Sabine Gar, who is going to talk about the tech part of the geo-trackers. We're going to have another applied learning activity where you're going to use the website and sort of explore and play with the device. And we're also going to watch a couple of role models using them outside. And then we're going to end with a discussion around applications. So with that, I'm going to hand it over to Sheila.
So yesterday, no, not yesterday, but yeah, yesterday, I was making fun of a friend of mine and saying that when she stands there, I can see her face. So I'm just looking at myself and thinking, okay, am I like this? Anyway, good afternoon. Before I start, as you can see from the title, I'm going to talk about structured observation in actually trying to understand behavior. But let me ask, is there anyone here who has experience having used structured observation method? Tracy, apart from, let's do that again. How many? Great, thank you. All right. So we are going to be relying on some of the experiences that we've had, but before then, allow me to talk to you about how we have used particularly structured observation to try and understand the interaction between animal behavior, human behavior, and animals in actually trying to understand transmission pathways. So Kelly has given an overview of how of the PACOM project, and basically we use a couple of methods. And one of the methods that I'm going to talk about today is structured observation. And the main objective of structured observation in this whole project is to try to understand three things. First, to observe and document where the infants that we are trying to understand how they get contamination to enteric disease pathogens, how they to understand and document where they go, whether within the household space or whether within the public space. And then to also determine the rate of touching and mouthing events. And then thirdly, to determine the behaviors that are usually performed by the caregivers to the infant. So it's basically just an observation to understand all these behaviors around the child. So how do we do that? And I'm going to use the same overall approach of the whole study to explain how we do that. So when we enroll children, we study there for a period of 14 days or 2 weeks, but the structured observation is done within 2 days. So on the second day and on the third day. Now on the second day, we observe the children for 5 hours within 5 hours of the first day, or rather the morning part of the second day, which is like within the 14 days, the 5 hours of the morning. And then on the third day, we observe the children again for another 5 hours in the afternoon. That gives us an opportunity to have covered almost like 10 hours of a child's day within a typical day, not just within 1 day, but within 2 days, so that we're able to see activities, a wide variety of activities that happen within the child's life. So, so today we are going to be only looking at the structured observation method of collecting data. So how do we also do that? We have a tablet-based application that we use that is called LiveTrack, that was actually developed by Stanford University, and we've adopted it to our work. So what we do is that it gives you, the interface gives you the opportunity to really capture the events that are happening around the child. So as you can see from this snapshot, we look at what happens around what the child touches. We also look at what happens around the caregiver. Like I said, one of the objectives was to look at the caregiver behaviors. And then we also look at what the child is able to put into their mouth. So if you look at that. Yeah, so we have something around behaviors around the caretaker or the child caregiver. Then we have behaviors around what the child is touching, and then behaviors around what the child is putting into their mouth. We are able to actually define some of the behaviors or some of the objects that the child is likely to touch and include them into the app. So sometimes we look at the human beings that the child is touching. Sometimes we've also defined the objects that the child is likely to touch. And also, because we're looking at the interaction with animals, looking at some of the animals within the space or within the household space that the child is likely to interact with. So all these are objects or experiences that a child can get into. So this is a photo of typically just explaining how our field staff are able to collect data. So when they go to the field, they observe, like I mentioned, they observe the child for 5 hours, and that is dependent on where the child is. Sometimes the child is within the house, or sometimes the child is within the space around the house. So in this first picture, you can actually see that particular interaction between where the child is placed and the field observer being right there where the child is. And of course, now there's the interaction with the animals that then also we try to understand whether the child gets into contact with animal or how close they get into contact with each other. The second photo actually also shows some of the spaces that we see the children moving into. As caregivers, sometimes they take the children with them outside, sometimes they have the children with them within the house, but then you can see the domestic environment within which the child spends their time in. So like in the second photo. So allow me to take you through some of the very preliminary results that we are seeing from the observation that we have tried to do. I probably didn't mention that we have done this work in 2 cities, that is in Nairobi, and we've also done that work. We are now currently doing the same in Kisumu. So these are preliminary results from Nairobi. And then within Nairobi, we're also looking at a middle income area and a low income area. So from the first, I think from your left, we are seeing an example of where the child mainly spends their time. And as you can see, most of the children are spending their time within the house, which is expected. But you also see that some children are spending their time outside the household, or rather around the compound, and sometimes in another location, which could be outside the house, which could be in another location that we cannot define. So basically, in as much as we have more of our children actually spending their time in the house, we still know, or we still can tell that some of them are going outside the house into other spaces. And so that also has implications on where they get exposed. And on the second figure, we are also trying to really estimate what are some of these objects or some of these things that the child puts into, within the children we're looking at are between 1 month and 1 year. So we're also looking at within the different age groups. Are these children, what are they putting into their mouths? So in the second graph, we've divided this into 4 age groups, up to 3 months, and then up to 6 months, up to 9 months, and up to 12 months. And what we are seeing is that children who are up to 3 months are mostly mouthing things around their caregivers, which is expected because that we know that these children are oftentimes usually just carried by their caregivers. So if you remember the first objective, we were trying to understand what is it around the child, what are the caregiver practices, and so this is almost very expected of what you would see. And then now trying to relate this to the animals, we wanted to also understand what's the probability of the child touching animals or even putting animal feces in their mouths. And what we can see from these diagrams is that we have a higher probability of the children actually touching an animal within the 10-hour period, and almost a lesser probability of the child having feces, or rather putting pieces of the animal into their mouth. So a probability of about 10%. That means that in as much as we can have the children getting into contact with animals, it's not always the case that they have their feces going into the animal's feces going into their mouth. And then just going into the general results, as we get to now try to understand how do we do the structured observation, and what comes out of it is that generally, when we go to the households and explain to them that we want to observe your child for about 5 or 10 hours in general, we initially get a good reception, and our caregivers are willing for us to observe them for about 10 hours or 5 hours per day. So that on the first day is acceptable. So with that, because we are observing, and like I showed the interface, we're able to look at what is the caregiver doing, what is the child touching, what objects are the children touching. Then we're able to observe a lot of other things that we otherwise not have captured with any other method, which means we're able to tell that this is feces, this is hand washing an event, this is a hand washing event, this is an animal, and all that. So the advantage is that we're able to capture all these behaviors. We are also noticing that, which is something that we probably would not have noticed if we were something, if we were observing it, if we were not observing, is that we notice that children have multiple caregivers, and I'm sure you have read about this from other studies. So many other caregivers are around the child, which can also be a potential source of contamination and transmission of pathogens. However, like I've also mentioned, we are doing the study in a low-income area and a middle-income area. One of the challenges we are having is that, especially in the low-income areas, we are having smaller spaces or small rooms within the house. So it is sometimes very difficult to observe what happens inside the house or inside the main room, especially if you know that the caregiver needs some space. So when the child goes beyond where we can go, then we are not able to observe, and we're not even able to tell what they are interacting with, especially if there's an animal that has gone inside the house. Sometimes children wake up. At first, I mentioned that caregivers really give us a good reception, and we've also experienced a situation where they get very comfortable and they get to do what they need to do. So sometimes, because they get to continue with what they're doing, we get the challenges that when the infant is probably awake and they're in the other room, we are not able to see what they're happening. So we can't even tell when if the infant is awake or not, because we can't even observe beyond the space that we are allowed to go to. Now, we also notice that children, I mentioned before that we are observing for about 5 hours, and caregivers usually give us a good reception. But then we notice that fatigue usually crops in, and around after 3 hours, caregivers start getting tired of being observed, and so they almost start getting like, oh my goodness, that is too long. Then they realize that the 5 hours are actually long. That is for some. Of course, because we are doing this for 2 days, there are others who we've seen many others who also get used to the situation that we are there observing them, and because we already tell them before we start that we don't want them to interrupt anything that they do, some of them actually just continue with what they have been doing. And because we have some who really get uncomfortable with being observed, as it is the case with many of us, we have seen cases of others who have had to change their behavior. For example, we'll notice that some of them, if they're supposed to be, say, especially with the young children who are about up to 3 months, if they're supposed to say, leave their children and do something else, they will just stick by their child because they want to be in their best behavior. And since they also don't know what they're observing, what we're observing, they'll stick by the child and want to be in their best behavior. And sometimes knowingly or unknowingly, like I mentioned before, the child will be mouthing something, the caregiver's hand, the caregiver's skin, for example. So we are able to also notice some of them, but that change of behavior, we've also noticed that. And so because of that, some of these disadvantages that I have mentioned are able now to be complemented by the geo-tracking activities that my colleague will now talk about, which is now how we are able now to complement the structured observation and observing behavior with the geo-tracking methods. So I want to
Next one.
welcome Phyllis.
Oh, no. Work group first. Role play.
Okay. Yeah. Really? All right. So I want to, initially I started by asking if we have some here who have done the structured observation, and I think I would want us to go into groups, right? And then really get into the practical demonstration of how we are able to do that. So I would request that those of us who have had some experience with structured observation, those people who put their hands up,
Laura.
I wish we could, those of us who have had some experience, if we could be here, so that this is group one, and all those people who would be interested in discussing about structured observation to be in this group. And then we'll have another group that will be focusing on the geo-tracking methods. Let me not really do that.
Okay, well, I think we have a role play, right? Do we have a mother?
Yeah, we can do that after we get a mother. Let's be your mother.
Okay. I think, right, so what we're gonna do is a role play to just demonstrate some of the events that we have observed in Pathway, but I think we're running a few minutes behind. So I'm gonna just summarize them really quick, and then what we wanna do is have just a couple of groups break out, because I know there's a wealth of information in this room. And for those of you that have had experience with this, if you could share your own experiences, because I know every situation is different. So for the spatial dynamic, Sheila mentioned some of them. Some of the other things that we've seen is, when participants are in the study, they feel obligated to stay around and make themselves convenient for the observers. And so a mother might have a baby and be, saying, oh, I need to get some milk to feed the child, and start to go to the market and stop and say, oh, sorry, I can't. I need to be here for you because you're observing me. So we've had some concerns about the modification of that sort of public-private domain movement, and Sheila highlighted some others for animals and hygiene behaviors and caregiving behaviors. So if you all could just sort of very briefly, this is only going to be a couple of minutes. Oops, if I can get the questions up. All right, so we're this, why is it going backwards? There we go. All right, so we're at this activity. So if you could just maybe turn towards the people that are near you, just a couple of groups, and those of you that have experience with this, kind of talk about these general questions, right? Like what have you seen in your studies of people being observed? Like how do they behave? How do they react to that? How would you personally respond to being observed? And share generally. We're just going to do this about 10 minutes, and then we're going to come back to geo-trackers.
The extreme bias of my presence. Like when I talk about when you say yes, I think that's so much of the work that I was doing was important to have that baseline, so I use that structured observation to build out that sense. Yeah. The easiest way and make sure we have the renovation of the hand that we use with provider and we're taking it and going to the bathroom. And not saying that I easy for me to know like what someone is like me, what their sensation things like that. My information was like how I'm treated, where I am limiting the bias by like making myself ready. So I go one person that's got I noticed that I was not with them about work. I did not say that anything that I was going to be doing. And so even the second time I was coming, I now had an understanding of some of the applications were ready. The first time they know. So the second time I was like, it's not like it's a lot of pressure coming in that they are really, but I never think about like I don't ever get to a point where you know that you're not very well, like what's like that's something I think in a space you have to know that like these are going the other. So either the long but then like when they ignore you, I like I'm you know, like very different.
So I think that I was curious about it, so my house is especially with I don't think that very much. So you got way, but for a while. So yeah, I'm curious. You know, would you recommend? Now you got to say yourself. But would you recommend something? Maybe go 3 hours.
I used to, and you got to control it. You can't control it. So I don't know what I'm saying.
Curious about this. My parents shows. And people are usually very careful. After a while, so I'm wondering that more than the balance. Just like so separate. It's like You're such a lot of self-control. And by the end, it's just like, that's free, as long as I can do whatever I want. And then you think about it, I don't know. That's right. Yeah, that's right. Yeah.
Well, I it's not even, there's so many different.
Yeah, but I teach students and they have there's quality something. And one of their, I sent it out just in the board and bought. They do better project. One of the reasons there's already.
I guess I'm, comments and let's bring it back.
One place. And because they get this. Table.
So as a worker, there's a lot of advantages and disadvantages to these observation techniques. One of the reasons that we picked up geotrackers for our study was because it offered this opportunity for remote sensing of data, both spatial and temporal, basically indirect observation. And we could do it for a longer period of time, right? It didn't have to be dependent upon the time of our enumerators, being in the home, or the convenience of our participant schedules. Gave our human subjects a lot of flexibility in sort of how they participate, how they share information with us. And from a spatial standpoint, the information is very location specific. So we're going to hand this off now to our project manager, Phyllis. Phyllis, are you online? Can you unmute yourself? I like you was left, but I can't hear her. Phyllis, can you unmute yourself, please? I wonder if the room is set up to. It says that we're talking. I'm wondering if the feed is not set up for audio.
Maybe the computer can be muted. Yeah. Is the sound muted there?
Oh, you might have to escape share screen to see all that with you.
Oh, yeah.
So stop share on the red.
It's online. And our microphone is on. I'm not seeing how to do it, so I might have to just go ahead and give her slides for her.
If you go up to view up at the top,
Yep.
I think it should give you one where you can see everybody. Go gallery. Oh, second one. Second.
The first.
Yeah, at the top. Yeah, gallery at the top. Yeah, that one.
I know she's online, but we're just not hearing her. So
I did call something from Patterson.
I'm gonna just move this one. Thank you.
Yeah.
All right.
Ellie, can you click the X on the bottom part? Yeah. So if I get it, it's just not approval.
Okay, so Phyllis is our project manager, and she. Yeah, good. So she is the one who really helped us take this concept of geo-tracking and figure out how to implement it in our study population in Kenya. So.
There's a lot of virtual.
Mhm.
Oh,
Oh, it's that loud to talk about it.
In a second, they're gonna be having live panels. Sorry about
Yeah. Oh, wow. You go to Phyllis and just put allow to talk.
Yeah.
Yeah, so
And just see what
that's,
happens.
yeah, so that's fine. If she's not there though, she's like, basically what I'm trying to do is promote her to a panelist. That way she
Right, I
can
saw
talk,
that,
share her
yeah.
video and everything.
Right.
That's why I'm asking if she's.
Since you're muted, can you ask that?
Is she on a computer? Okay.
From a phone.
Okay.
You've seen the bed, maybe?
Personal challenges.
Hi everyone, I can hear you.
Okay, Phyllis, I think you're gonna just have to tell me the next slide and I will advance for you. Okay. This. Okay. All right, so, go ahead, Phyllis.
All right, thanks Kelly. And thanks Sheila for setting the pace. My name is Phyllis Busiane. I'm a research officer at African Population and Health Research Center. So I'm going to present about the general implementation of the geotracking exercise that we did in Kenya, and also some of the lessons that we learned from this exercise. So before we began the study, we did a pilot in one of the study villages in Nairobi with the aim of developing a protocol for use in the general or the parents pathom study. And from this pilot, we developed some procedures for using the geotrackers on infants and animals. We also documented some of the concerns of the study participants, that is the infants, the caregivers, and the community members. We also documented some of the reactions from the infants and animals during the geotracking exercise, and also came up with some of the recommendations for adoption in the pathom study as well as other public health studies. Next slide, please. Yeah, so we began this process by first identifying the animal harnesses and geotracking devices. And we had a list of required eligibility criteria for use in selecting of these devices and harnesses. That is, for instance, they have to be small in size, they have to have minimal interference with the animal behavior or the infant behavior, they have to have a long battery life, and of course, we have to retrieve data from them. We also did a stakeholder engagement meeting just to get their feedback before we began the study. And we selected stakeholders from national level and at the community level. And next slide, please. So thirdly, we now did our pilot study, that is the geotracking exercise in the community. And we did this with 3 aims. First, to determine the acceptability of the exercise among the caregivers and the community, and also test whether we could recover the geotracker devices after 2 days of geotracking, and also see whether they could last for 24 hours period. So the community health volunteers really helped us in this process, because before even we began the process, they identified the households with the infants who are between 1 day and 12 months. They did the consenting, and now during the geotracking day is when we went there with the enumerators. We did the consenting now and obtained a written consent, and we now began our geotracking exercise. Next slide, please. Yeah, so lastly, after the exercise, we also did an exit interview with the caregivers and the CHVs whom we had enrolled in the study, just to get their insights from them concerning the overall geotracking exercise, and also document some of their feedbacks. Next slide. Yeah, so from these methodologies, we came up with some findings. First, we identified the animal harnesses and geotracking technology for use in this study. And for the trackers, some of the characteristics that we were able to look for in the trackers included the accuracy of the data and reliability of the data, battery life, geolocation history, of course, the cost of subscription, and they should be a multinational, they should have a multinational usability. For the animal harnesses, we considered appearance. That is, we selected dull colored harnesses, although most of them comes in conspicuous colors. We also considered wear mechanisms, and they should be adjustable. From the stakeholder meeting that we had with the community members, we were able to document some of the concerns, although most of them were speaking about behavioral data concerns. That is the concerns whether we will be able to persuade the caregivers to grant us permission to track, and the safety issues and privacy issues. Next slide. Yeah, so from the exercise, we were able to document some of the reactions from the infants and the animals. Luckily, we didn't have any reactions, or all the infants, our infants were comfortable with the trackers, and even the caregivers were comfortable with us tracking their infants. For the animals, we had some levels of most of the animals showed some distress. For instance, up to about 1 hour, 30 minutes to about 1 hour, and then they adjusted to that. For the caregivers, as I've mentioned, most of them accepted the geotracking exercise, and we realized that the device physical form, that is, our device is smaller in size, and this really influenced the acceptability rates by the caregivers. There were also, however, there were a concern about the neighbors or the community members seeing the trackers or the tracker devices on the animals. Next slide, please. Yeah, so these are some of the pictures from the animal tracking and also the infant tracking. So you can see there's a chicken there, comfortable, very comfortable with the harness and the tracker, a dog. For the cat here, this was during the 10th minute. It was still showing some distress, but after some time, it got comfortable with that. For the infants, we preferred placing the geo-trackers inside their socks or inside their pockets, as you can see from this picture here. And when they fell asleep, we could advise the caregivers to place the tracker just close to the infant so that they are comfortable. Next slide, please. Yeah, so on technical and data management aspects, there were no reports of battery depletion from all their trackers. However, there were some delays on some of the devices detecting the GPS signal, especially in the indoor settings. We were able to track the movements of all the devices or the animals in real time on an attractive website. As you can see from these pictures, we were able to, we could track the animals for the entire 24 hours. And if we, at some point, we lose the tracker, we are able to put on the lights and the sound, and we can track and find the tracker where it is. Yeah, so the last activity, we did an exit interviews with the CHVs and the caregivers, and mostly their concern was about privacy and safety of the privacy. That is our tracker devices collecting personal data from them, and also safety issues, whether the trackers could cause any harm to the infants. So most of these were addressed by the CHVs, and we also addressed them that the trackers were not taking any personal data, and also they were safe. For animal distress, we were able to observe that for the first 1 hour, and after that they adjusted. So there's also curiosity from non-respondents when we began the study, but after some time they got used to the study. Thank you. Next slide. Yeah, so these are some of the key challenges that we experience in the field. That is accidental switching on and off of the devices by either the caregivers, or the infants, the siblings of the infants, and also the enumerators. There's also signal issue, especially in the indoor setting, animal distress because of the size of the harness. And also we lost 1 tracker. That means we had incomplete data for 1 household. Yeah, so from this exercise, we derived some recommendations or learnings. For instance, placement locations. We were able to advise the caregivers. First, we gave them a chance to tell us where they feel comfortable placing the trackers on the infants. And then most of them were saying inside the socks or inside the pockets. So we documented this in our protocol. Acceptability, most of them accepted the study, but we encourage our CHVs to work closely with the community or the caregivers to tell them about the study. Tracker signal for all the trackers, especially, I think Sheila has mentioned that we are doing this study in a middle income area and low income area. So for the low income areas, we had signal issues, a lot of signal issues. So we encourage our enumerators to stand inside or outside the door, like less than 5 meters from where the infant is. Reducing animal discomfort, so for reducing animal discomfort, we chose, we decided to track animals who had large, or can I say body mass index? Yeah, not the smaller animals. For security of the trackers, we concluded that we were not tracking animals, free roaming animals, but only tracking animals who are roaming inside the compound. Next slide, please. Yeah, so from this exercise, we came to a conclusion that the devices could have had the potential to be used in human health environment and within our local community. And we also noted that working closely with the community health workers or leaders can really increase the acceptance and adoption of these devices. And lastly, we will only manage this if we provide rigorous training to field enumerators on the geo-tracking protocols and methodologies. Thank you. I think that's all.
Thank you, Melanie. Next speaker, Sabine, is going to talk to us about working with GeoTracker technology.
Oh, that make it full screen.
Oh, it's a PDF. The iris is not right.
Yeah. Yeah, I was trying to make it full screen. Right, correct, top right corner.
Your other right.
Yep.
Right.
Arrows.
I'm getting better at this.
What?
Stuff.
Oh, no.
So yeah.
Down, down,
Down
down,
further.
down, 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 down.
There.
One more. We're all learning new.
Yeah, so as you said, like we are using this data for like so many things. That's why we wanted to make sure we were using the right data or not. That's why we did the study and analyzing the validity and reliability of practice GPS devices, and I worked with my professor Daniel Sewell, who is a professor of Department of Biostatistics. So most of the things have been like already said, but so we are using this data to understand children's exposure and animals' exposure to different things. And so our goal is to determine the reliability and validity of attractive GPS devices. So with this data set, we can do like so many things. So this is just one sample of like what we did with the data set. This is the left side of the data set is like left side of the plot is the change in latitude and longitude for a time frame of 30 hours, and the right side is the exact location of where the infant was. So for the motivation, we had like we already said like we had like observational data, and we wanted to make sure we got the correct data. So we had almost like 1250 hours of structured data, and I think this is just for one city, and we have more coming. So we wanted to make sure like the data we are using is the correct one. So the measure we are using to determine validity and reliability is one is absolute validity. So absolute validity is like, so I know like exactly latitude and longitude where I am, and we are comparing that to the device latitude and longitude. And for relative validity, we know we have like placed two person in such a way that we exactly know how far apart they are from each other. And from two devices, we get latitude and longitude, and we'll calculate the measure latitude and longitude, or measure distance from the latitude and longitude. For intra-device reliability is, so for instance, like if I hold the device here and I'm still for like 1 minute, I'm supposed to get like distance 0 because I'm not moving. So we are trying to see how it changes. So for the research question for absolute validity is, so what is the expected distance between the location reported by like randomly selected GPS device and its true location? So we want to know how far we are from the actual distance. And we have the another variable called positional uncertainty. So it is such that like our data set has one variable which determines like if the variable is 5, we don't know like in a radius of 5 meters where the person is. So it's kind of positional error. And we have like so many GPS devices. So we want to make sure that like GPS, like or the GPS device is different from another. And regarding location as well, like we are doing this in like indoor setting, outdoor setting, and there are like different environmental and aspects which might impact the satellite transmission. So we wanted to make sure we didn't get different measures in different locations. And similarly for relative validity as well, we wanted to calculate the expected distance from the actual known distance, like 1 meter, 2 meter, or 5 meter, and like what is the changes in GPS devices and what the changes in location. For intra-device reliability, same thing, the expected distance and how the expected distance changes with the positional uncertainty. The higher the positional uncertainty, we expect the distance to be higher. And same thing, how the variation in distance with GPS devices and how the variation changes with the locations. So for the exercise, we had 4 GPS devices used. We had 2 districts, Kivera and Jeju. And at each location, we had 2 staff members, each with 2 devices standing still at 1 meters, 2 meters, and 5 meters apart for approximately 5 minutes. So for that time, we had the data device in rapid mode, so which allows like 15 data points per minute. So we wanted to make sure that we have enough power for our study and we have enough data set. So these are the pictures of what we did. So for the location one, it is outdoor open place with clear view of sky, and second one narrow route with partial view of sky, and between fences, and location 3 indoor. And this is the sample raw data we get from the tractive GPS devices. We see the time. So this is the time like from the standard time, and the other is latitude and longitude, altitude is speed, course, and the positional uncertainty variable we were talking before. We have all this. So for the modeling, for absolute validity and relative validity, we use Bayesian approach for mixed effect Poisson model, because we expected the data set to be in such a way that we would get continuous distribution. But what happened was like the data would be still for like 30 seconds, and it will just go down and it will remain still. We thought like if we hold this like still for a minute, we'll just see up and down, but it didn't happen. So we had to use a discrete distribution. So we use Poisson Poisson distribution with random intercepts for location and device. And for intra-device reliability, same thing, we have to use the zero inflated Poisson model. So for the results, for absolute validity, the expected distance we observe was 9.86 with confidence interval, credible interval of 3 and 18. So I think we were like quite positive with this, because the positional uncertainty we were seeing was quite high, like 10, 20 meters, 30 meters, 40 meters, 50 meters. To in average seeing like a number 9, we were pretty confident with this. And this is the graph of expected distance with positional uncertainty, and the red line is y equals to x line. So we expected that the change in the positional uncertainty will also change the expected distance like linearly, but that didn't happen. So we thought it was fine. And for the variation, I think this is the most like convincing point, because the variation was so low. So even if we choose any like randomly choose any devices, we randomly pick any locations, the difference wasn't much there. So for the relative validity for 1, 2, and 5 meters, we were not able to capture the relative validity, because we got the coefficient of true distance in negative, which meaning that if we increase the distance, expected distance decreases. So that doesn't make sense. So we are trying this activity in a longer region, like more 10 meters or 20 meters, to observe the relative validity. And for intra-device reliability, I think this was very convincing as well. So because the expected distance was just 1.76, so ideally it should be 0, because we are still like staying in the same location. But since we have the system error, so the positional uncertainty, so I think getting the value of 1.76 was quite convincing. And similarly here, so the line is right there, and then our expected distance doesn't increase as much, so it was convincing. So the variation due to randomness in devices and location was also quite low. So there wasn't much change if we choose a different device, or if we go in a different location. So concluding, like as I already said, there was not much variation in expected distance due to location or device, and intra-device reliability was quite high. So we observed the intra-device reliability, and given the positional uncertainty of like we see here the range of like 3 to 194 meters, some of them even have like 194 meters of positional uncertainty, and getting 9 meters of expected distance, we thought absolute validity was there. And for the relative validity, we could try repeating the exercise in a larger distance. And to take away like things from here, like there was positional uncertainty variable, so we could like filter out like higher positional uncertainty variables to feel that like those variables are like not comfortable using. So we need to find a range, or we all need to like sit together and find a value, so that we don't want to use such like a value where positional uncertainty is greater. Thank you. And then yeah.
Yeah. So first, we just want to kind of give you a quick, we don't have time to go through how we built this, but where's the, no, not that. Here. Oh, okay, I got what you're saying. All right. Okay, so this is just when you pull all of this information together from devices that have been worn by infants and animals in a home at the same time, you can make these 24-hour time-lapse videos that demonstrate their movement in space and their overlap in time with each other.
Yeah, I think here, like, I think the exercise we did before, like, we can use here to identify like when the children and animals were exposed, like we could have like certain, like 10 meters or like 50 meters, so of radius to determine it, because we won't be actually getting 0 meter difference between these two. So the exercise we did before, we can use that in order to find the values when children and infant were like exposed to each other. So yeah, I think, yeah, there are like, with this data set, I think there are like so many things we could like do, and then I think it is.
Are the chickens typically that close to the babies? Like the chicken, it looks like the chicken
Yeah, I
is
think-
attacking the baby.
Yeah. No, so it's like, I think it's a bigger map, and then when you look from up. Like,
Okay.
I mean, these are very crowded urban areas where,
Yeah.
the chickens are brought in and, so again, there's a certain range of overlap there that's caused by positional uncertainty where, you can't say there's contact, but you can say that they were cohabitating some type of area at the same point in time. Right, so we're gonna move on to the applied learning session. So Max and Fanta, if you wouldn't mind heading outside. All right. All right, so if you have not yet, you don't have to go to the website or download the app, because we're also going to have the website shown up here on the screen. But what we're going to do is actually have you look at the movement reflected by geo-trackers on the screen while we have 2 volunteers outside doing a geo-tracker waltz. So give it a minute, you're scanning.
That doesn't work.
It's not working.
I think it is zoom in. Can you try zooming in?
I can share it again after, but let me go ahead and go to the.
No, it won't.
Ah, we went to the
Let's
website.
try zooming in.
You can just check it on the App Store, tracking.
kbakerbio@AOL.com. Let's see.
How often do you have to recharge them?
For the data set?
Sheila or Phyllis?
Every time. They can last for. You have to visit the house a lot. We only use them for 24 hours. So by the time we all get them out.
So I'm gonna turn on, so currently the way that it is set up, let me zoom in here. Yeah, so you can look out the window and see Max and Font outside, right? So what you're seeing here is the device PGUF. I'm not sure whose hands that's in. So you see that here, basically right outside the window of the building. We have this currently set on a 5-minute sampling mode. Because it conserves battery life. There is the potential to do a rapid sampling mode that's like 2 or 3 seconds. Every 2 or 3 seconds it pings the satellite, but that will kill your battery pretty quickly. So we don't typically use that. But we're going to turn it on for the moment, just so we can sort of connect what we see outside. And you're welcome to get up and go to the window and look at them. They're out there having a friendly conversation. Okay. So, now we see on the screen, like somebody's walking, right, and moving around.
And now it's stopped.
They like each other, but not that much, right? They're not close enough to hug. So now we see a little bit more moving, so.
Yeah.
Is it
Yeah.
Fanta moving?
Yeah.
And actually, let me switch to the other one and do live tracking on that one. So if you want richer data, you can certainly generate it, using this live track mode. If you have a shorter time application, then that might be sort of useful. See them wandering around out there.
It's all satellite, or does it triangulate with cell towers, or?
The device has actually, so can you pass around our demos down there? Yeah, so the device has a both a GPS chip and a cell chip. And one of the reasons that we've settled on this company was because it offers coverage in over 150 countries around the world. So regardless of our work, other people could easily adopt it. It's inexpensive. They have fantastic customer service. So they're very responsive. But yeah, it's a very sort of very efficient device. There's some things that you can't do with the user interface. So like that map that I showed you, you can't show the two devices time lapse moving over time. You have to extract the information and build that out for yourself. But you can export your coordinate data for each device from this website. And so one other thing that you can do with this, I was asked about this yesterday in a session, is you can also look at, sorry, this is our Airbnb. Let's go here. All right, so you'll know that, so this is where our device is right now. But I'm just gonna go back out. You know that there are red spots on here, green spots. So you can also look at heat maps that show you sort of density of time spent by a device in a specific location. This information, again, you can do screenshots of it. It doesn't export as a sort of hotspot variable for you, but you can generate that through our other types of coding software.
And if we had downloaded on our phone, we could choose the device that we want to watch.
That's correct.
But
Yeah,
how much better are they than AirTags?
Don't know. With AirTags, we actually, let me have a look at the picture.
We looked at, I sort of did the consumer trying to find the best device that is like cheap, right? We don't want to spend thousands of dollars and can work in Kenya. That was a big deal. And then, but the thing with APHRC is that you need to like maybe put the transporter or whatever in his best. Sometimes they have to put it inside the animal, of course, that has some privacy concerns. And then another thing is that it has lots of things disruptive, like metal, like if you're in an urban space that is super dense, like the corrugated roofing shades, you're not going to get good readings. So we need to think about like, what is the topography? How does the device work in an indoor setting, and tracking? So we just decided to go the route of pet trackers instead of the usual very expensive GPS data loaders that is used in like the ecology field. That's like $1,500. It's pretty nice, pretty good, but we are not going to be observing animals moving across 1,000 meters, right? It's very small, within maybe 100 to 150 meters at most, not 1,000 meters. So it didn't make sense to spend that much money. We don't even have that much money. So this and there's some other, it's called like Baton. We tried one, it's pretty good, but the battery life was draining fast. And then there's one other one that is, we just decided to look at Amazon reviews and do market research to figure out what works best for us, because there are very few studies that have really used tractive as a research. People prefer to go the route of the research grade GPS data loaders, but those are super expensive. And in the field of public health, it's not as applicable. If you were in like aviation, avian, you're looking at avian studies or ecology, then you can spend that much money. But for us, like what would work for us to achieve what we want to do without spending a lot of money, without being super heavy, and connect to the local GPS, cellular, or satellite, and that's why we use it.
And how much were they each? Did you buy in bulk? I mean,
so they're about $40 to $50 each as a one-time charge, but the subscription service, it's about $80 per year. So it's like $6, $7 a month for just continuous. As much data as you generate, you get. And then one of the nice things about it is that there's a warranty on these devices. So if your device, we've definitely had to replace older devices that we started with 2 years ago. The batteries just kind of wore down, lost So you can sort of return defective devices and they will replace them for free. So we're at the tail end of the session. We also have a quick discussion. I think we've kind of gone over in a few spots, so maybe it's just gonna go through one or two questions, but we want to make sure that, so we've talked about it in the context of pathome and enteric disease, but as I mentioned at the beginning, this is disease that's not agnostic, right? You can use it for a lot of applications. And so we really kind of want to hear from you all, whether this inspires some ideas about, what you might use it for in your own work.
So, okay, I'm gonna quickly share a link that we all can look at to, just give me,
It's there, slide 38. Oh, I'm sure.
okay. Yeah, so if you could just, can you click on the QR code to go to that slide there? Then I'm gonna give us a minute to do that while I turn on the live polling. Are we all good? Okay. So can everyone see it? The live polling working? Okay, so basically this question is just to know, we've talked a lot about, like, we started from the structured observation, and in my group, we had really amazing discussions on how you can use structured observation. And I'm taking that to what we've learned about GPS GeoTracker. What topics would you like to explore in the field of One Health or public health, water and sanitation in Nigeria? Would you like to explore using geo-tracking spatial assessment methods? All right, okay. I'm going to ask people to, like, volunteer more, like, their own ideas about what you're saying. So I would give us 2 more minutes and then I will turn it over. All right, I think we have, I'm gonna stop the poll now. Okay.
Tracy, is that you?
No, why he's fine, my friend.
Okay, wow. Oh, no, okay, share it first. I don't know what happened to the results, but I'm going to just say the options we have here, we have different things about, like, mass vaccination campaign coverage. How, that sounds so interesting. Can someone, like, just tell me more about that? I'm interested to know how we can use, like, GPS technology to understand vaccination campaign coverage.
Yeah, I mean, so I wrote that, it wouldn't be perfect, I don't think, but we're trying to reduce measurement error in that region, these get back to whatever. And then old school sort of register forms, and I think it would be interesting to be able to see a vaccination campaign teams to sort of mirroring the register, make it into all areas.
Okay.
Of the city. Driving around and see your coverage of it later online again, where it goes.
Thank you so much. Then another one, street informal workers and access to toilets and hygiene. That's interesting and kind of similar to what I've used live tracking for. Average movements by animals that other studies can use. Does keeping track of my kids count? That's funny and nice. animal interactions with one another, domestic versus wildlife. Anyone done wildlife research here or use tracking device for wildlife research?
Just GPS.
Okay. Interactions with water bodies, water source use, proximity, identify schistosoma transmission hotspot. That's super interesting. Cattle air tracking for an evaluation of dairy farm projects in Nigeria. Sorry, who came up with that idea? More
It's
information.
really not a lot. It's just another project I'm working on.
One helps.
Oh, I guess no idea. Anyway, yeah, there's a Morgan States Foundation project that I'm working on an evaluation of in Nigeria, aimed at helping rural dairy farming communities connect their product to processors and the market and try to supplant some of the imported dairy like dairy products that are imported from mostly Europe. So rural farming communities, the issue in northern Nigeria is that a lot of them migrate during the dry season, and that makes it difficult for them to actually connect to the market. So the project is aimed at helping communities become more like sedentary through feed and fodder programs that can help, and also borewell drilling so there's wash tank that can help communities stay in one place during the dry season and continue selling their product. And so, seeing whether the cattle are migrating long distances during the dry season, or also if they're saying within the confined area around a household and eating feed and fodder, or if they're continuing to graze or forage during the dry season, that might be an interesting use.
Thank you so much for that. Other top, someone is antimicrobial resistance. I think so. That's it. AMR. I think that's what it means.
Yeah.
Transmission, or trying to understand how that works. In chemical exposure locations, directionality of transmission between human and animals, respiratory infections. It seems everyone is kind of interested in how to do the spatial tracking of behaviors between human and animals. I'm going to just turn on the light pole of another question. This is just trying to know, if you were to perform this kind of research, what are the key issues you would consider, thinking about the questions we've talked about, what are the key issues you would consider as you design and implement your GPS tracking? Thinking about the animals you want to use, what is their behaviors or quirks, ethical and cultural issues in the community or settings you pick, sampling, how do you want to sample, then other device or environmental constraints, and just using what you've learned from this session. What are the key issues you want to really think about to ensure that you collect accurate valid data? So I'm going to present to see what options are coming up. Oh, wow. Is this waterproof? Interesting.
It is, although we have not battle tested it.
No ducks. No duck tracking.
Yeah.
Anyone done spatial tracking, using GPS devices?
Not tracking points.
Points.
So GPS points that, so no items that go on something that tracks their movement over
Okay.
time. They're just points, point prevalence data.
So what would you say are the major lessons or you've learned doing geolocation or?
Well, that I was going to put it, but it was one of the first things that was mentioned, that de-identification of, when you're getting this type of data down to the household level, you have to be so careful with how this information gets out, because you are saying a household has X, Y, and Z, or does not have X, Y, and Z. And so that the dissemination of that information that is usable at those more granular levels for people who are doing research or doing policy or intervention work, while also respecting the privacy of the households. So recent GPS project I did, we didn't need it at that level. So we went out as far as we could to demonstrate. So there was no way
to use the maps that we were creating to actually identify where people and participants were. And we were able to communicate that on the front end, that we could even show them kind of the types of maps. So they're like, oh yeah, there's no way you'll be able to say that that's my house and my kids and my cows kind of thing. So I'd say anytime you're doing this, thinking on that back end, that future proofing for how am I going to demonstrate this data to the larger group and back to that household.
Thank you so much. Could you tell us some of the strategies you use to ensure that the data is de-identified, like that you can't really identify any specific features, distinct features for the household?
Well, for the last study we did, we kept separate data sets too. So we were really trying to kind of make sure that the GPS data, we had that information and we had it to, participant IDs. And then over here was where the participant ID data was to the participant. So trying to do some of that. So in case there was movement of data between, because we had different country, we're moving data between countries across emails, across different platforms of data sharing. And, you always it's just so easy to accidentally send something wrong. So we try to be very careful with our data management strategies. And then again, just on that front end of not collecting things we don't need. So we tried to set it up into our actual study protocols too.
All right, I'm going to quickly go through.
Well, I was just gonna say, so it was actually me that posted that because I wanted to foster conversation. One of the things that we are doing at the moment is zooming into the point where you can't really like figure out streets. Like if you looked at a map, you wouldn't necessarily figure out where you are. And then, like with Google Earth, you can strip out street names, location, places, et cetera. So you can anonymize it to nothing other than like, sort of pink grids of development and streets on a map. One thing that I don't know about yet is whether, like now there's all of this AI image searching. So one thing that we're not completely sure of yet is like, is having nothing other than a T on a map, is that sufficient enough to sort of anonymize the location? But yeah, I mean, if anybody else has comments on de-identification, that'd be awesome.
Thank you so much. I'm going to quickly just go through some of the comments and we can discuss more about it quickly before our time is fast spent. Someone says, is there a tracker that uses a common non-proprietary charger like USB-C? Kelly, I can't remember the details. How do we charge our device? Does it have?
It's a USB to USB cord.
Oh, it is. When I looked on Amazon, it looked like some weird proprietary. So it's USB-A to USB-C. Oh, that's great.
Okay. So someone says, I think people are really interested in the mechanics of how the device works or like usability and stuff. We can link up with you to give you more information about that. So I'm going to move away from those kind of questions. Safety of those installing trackers on animals, X-ray. Oh my God, that's such a valid question. Someone just asked, like, how do you think of thinking of animal behavior, or how do we put on the trackers on the animals? Are we to do that, or is it the household, the owner of the animal that's going to put on the tracker on the pets?
We do owners.
Yeah, the owners, and when they can't, we assist them to do it, because some of them wouldn't know how to do it, but we make sure we assist them to do it so that then we are making sure that the animal is not distressed.
Yeah, another valid question, appropriate durations for data collection. In this field, there's so many papers on how long should you sample, sampling intervals, and I think it varies depending on your study goals. And if anyone has any other thing to add to that, based on your experience, how do you select? Oh, Laura.
Actually, it was a question about how you assess inter-day variability, because you said you did 24 hours. Have you done a week-long study to be like, they're pretty similar every day, or the chicken's similar, but the dog is not similar or something? Or is that the next step?
Not yet. At the moment, all we could do is compare the day 2, day 3 kind of information.
Oh, okay, I missed that calendar.
Yeah, so we had we had 2 different 5-hour time points that were selected to add diversity rather than consistency.
Right. Okay.
But no, so within subjects, we definitely do not have a month later.
I think that's for the live track, but she's asking.
I'm asking about the dogs and the chickens.
Oh,
yeah. Again, maybe it's similar because they're not it's the weekend, and I'm like,
I go here.
Yeah.
Yeah, well, I mean, and also animal movement, so I guess going back to structured observation and this conversation around human modification of behaviors, animals aren't that different, right?
I would
They're
assume that.
domesticated.
Yeah.
The cats come up and they want to be petted and, so, we have not looked at like individual animals' repeat visits.
Yeah, I would assume it's not that different. Maybe in rural areas, you have like when they go out to pasture seasons versus when they don't or something like that. But I would assume day to day is similar. I just wondering.
Yeah, I mean, it may be seasonal. Do you think, Sheila, do you think that some of our participants behave differently when it's rainy, cold? Yeah. Or how they treat their animals or anything growing.
I don't think so. We haven't come across.
Yeah.
So we've, another issue to talk about, since everyone is concerned about accuracy and precision, which is a big deal in GPS measurements, like how do you, if anyone have any comments about this, how are you able to determine the magnitude of measurement of certainty? And if you use any threshold to say, okay, this is this is accurate location data versus this is inaccurate location data, and how have you interpreted that? Does anyone have any experience with that? Or we all just like learning? Okay.
I can't say, like, I don't think it was clear from Sabine's presentation, but we will be sort of curating the data set. We'll be looking at the data set in the variety of different contexts, like when and how do you use data in indoor settings, and when and how do you use it in outdoor settings. And in those outdoor settings, if you're in a really population dense urban area, is that outdoor data quality different than in a more spacious middle class?
And then the last thing we'll talk about is social norms and ethical issues in the community. And I'll let Kelly talk more about it, and anyone can, Sheila, please tell us more about how we're able to secure community buy-in and share our, and like get permission to share household level location data, and as well as community perceptions and rumors.
Okay, so we realized that when we started, I think Phyllis gave a presentation about what we did before we started, or maybe she talked about it. What we realized is that we needed to do a lot of engagement with the community and with the leaders to make sure that that is acceptable. Remember those perceptions that she mentioned about people thinking they are being tracked in their privacy and all that. So we started from a higher perspective where we engage with the leaders, because we know that they can also help us pass the same information to the lower level. And we got the same questions that we're getting from the community members themselves, which is, are we sure this is private? What kind of information are you tracking? Are you able to see people and all that? So that we distilled, or we dispelled all those fears with the higher level community leaders, or rather national leaders, same to the community leaders, to the lowest level, even to the community health volunteers who are our people that we work with to the house, when we go to the household. Then we also had a chance to kind of test the trackers with the community. And some of the information that we were getting was the same beliefs, where to place the trackers, what kind of information the tracker gets, and also the kind of fears about whether this, there's sometimes you get information like there's some little flickering light, so people will get scared that probably they are being watched because of that flickering light. But of course, dispelling all those fears. And so by and by, the good thing is that once we see now from the larger perspective of the study, once what goes round. So when one house is successful and the second house is successful, especially in a low-income area, what goes round? And everybody just then starts getting familiar, and others now start accepting the technology. So by the time we get to the next set of households, they already have heard something about it. And so they're able to quickly, or rather, we don't have to use a lot of words to explain. So combine that with the information that we've given the community, to the leaders, to the chiefs, to the community leaders, then that helps us to dispel all fears and then answer some of the questions that they might have. So different strategies to make the to ensure that, yeah. So,
thank you. All right, so I know we're sort of at the end of the session here, so I just wanted to do a quick wrap up. You know, we obviously have a long ways to go. As I mentioned, we're using this in the parent study now. The pilot study provided us a smaller amount of data, but you know, as we go forward in the next, couple of years, we're really going to be comparing our behavioral and spatial information and trying to understand the sort of trade-offs. It's possible that we have reactivity to the geo-trackers as well. And so these are some of the questions that we're going to be addressing, but they do provide us really rich day in the life of data for both infants and animals. And, we think that they provide a fantastic complement to surveys and observation and other types of methods. There are some limitations on that. And as we've talked about, thinking about ethics and de-identification and spatial accuracy. So we'll know a lot more when we have more data to work with. Fortunately, we do feel very good about the tracker we've picked for this purpose. It does perform pretty consistently to each other and have some location. But it is something that may not necessarily be used by itself, right? There are things that structured observation or surveys add that we just can't get with geo trackers, the sort of count data on what children are touching and things like that. Brief acknowledgement that this is the broader parent study is funded by National Science Foundation, National Institute of Health, Ecology and Infectious Disease grant. I am a co-PI with Dan Sewell, who Sabine referred to as a brilliant biostatistician. Partners include African Population and Health Research Center, Maseno University, Princeton. Tractive very generously provided us extra devices in this sort of anonymous account to use for the session. So we appreciate their contributions. And obviously the community members, and as Sheila mentioned, the community health volunteers are really critical for piloting and current use of this device. The Pathom team is very diverse disciplinarily. So there's a lot of people that are involved in pulling in all of this information. This young woman up here in the left in the white sweater is Phyllis, the voice that you heard over the microphone. And last but not least, so we passed around the geo trackers and you got to watch Max and Fanta moving around to outside. But we are going to do a drop-in clinic today during the poster session. Yes, somebody is going to be in this chicken costume. So we're going to be on the north side of the building where the picnic tables are. It's a much less structured scenario. You show up with your ideas. We're going to give you a geo tracker. You can do whatever you want with it and we'll answer the questions for you. So that being, and we're also going to be leaving the trackers on for the session. So if you want to log in anytime and see where they're going, figure out where our Airbnb is, you're welcome. And so I thank you all for attending. Please do come to the drop-in clinic. If we pass around a geo tracker and you have it, please return it so we have it for that clinic. Thank you all.
Really good job. Thank you. So Kelly, I looked online, the default is a guide on tractor. It's only $7. So I was looking and I was like, it's very charged. I mean, she might get extract.
I don't think they're.
But